He grabbed her arm in front of 1,040 soldiers, leaned into her face, and said the words he thought made him untouchable. "Remember, I'm a Navy SEAL." The whole room froze. Men who had faced enemy fire held their breath because they saw what he could not. They saw the calm in her eyes. They saw her look down at his hand like it was nothing. And they knew in that terrible silent second that Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks had just made the worst mistake of his entire life. Before we go on, if you believe respect should be earned and never demanded, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And tell me in the comments what city you are watching from right now, because I truly want to see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to how it all began. The morning at Camp Pendleton started like every other training day. The air was cold and gray, the kind of morning where boots hit the pavement in one steady rhythm, and coffee tasted better than it had any right to. More than 1,000 soldiers, Marines, and Special Operations personnel filled the enormous training facility. Some were young, barely out of their teens, still learning what it meant to carry the weight of a uniform. Others were seasoned, quiet, the kind of men who had seen things they would never speak about at the dinner table. And among them walked a legend, or at least that was how Daniel Brooks saw himself. They called him Titan. He had earned the nickname somewhere along the way through multiple deployments and a wall of medals that he made sure everyone knew about. When Titan entered a room, heads turned. Younger soldiers stood a little straighter. Conversations grew quieter. He had built something over the years, a reputation that walked into every room 3 steps ahead of him. But a reputation is a strange thing. It can be built on courage. It can also be built on fear. And somewhere along the way, Titan had stopped being able to tell the difference. That morning, he strolled through the mess hall like a king surveying his kingdom. He nodded at a few men. He ignored others. He liked being noticed. He needed it the way some men need air. Because deep down in a place he would never admit even to himself, Daniel Brooks had begun to wonder if he was anything at all without the crowd watching. And then he saw her. She was sitting alone at a corner table. A woman in a plain uniform, no flashy decorations, no rows of ribbons. She had a stack of documents in front of her and a cup of coffee in her hand. She was reading something slowly, carefully, the way a person reads when they already know what they are looking for. Titan almost walked past her. Almost. But something stopped him. Something he could not name. Maybe it was the stillness of her. Everyone else in that room moved around him. She did not. She sat there like a stone in a river, and the whole world flowed past without touching her. He looked closer. He did not recognize her. That bothered him. Titan knew everyone worth knowing on this base. He knew the officers, the trainers, the guys who mattered. But this woman was a stranger. And strangers, in his experience, either wanted something from him or were about to learn who he was. He decided to introduce her to the second option. He walked toward her table with the easy confidence of a man who had never once been told no. He stopped a few feet away, planted his boots, and waited for her to look up. She did not. He waited a moment longer. She turned a page. Now a smarter man might have taken that as a sign. A wiser man might have understood that a woman who does not look up when a decorated SEAL stands over her is either very foolish or very, very confident. And she did not look foolish. But Titan was not in the habit of reading signs. He was in the habit of being read. "Morning," he said, letting the words sit in the air. She finished the line she was reading. Then and only then she looked up. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was calm, even. There was no fear in it, no admiration, no nervous little smile that so many people gave him. Just 2 words, polite and complete, and then her eyes went back down to her documents. Titan felt something tighten in his chest. He did not have a name for it yet, but it was the beginning of something dangerous. "I'm Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks," he said a little louder now. "Navy SEAL." He said it the way other men might announce a fortune or a title of nobility. He said it, and he waited for the change to come over her face, the widening of the eyes, the sudden shift in posture. He had watched that transformation 1,000 times. It never got old, but it did not come. "Captain Emily Carter," she said simply, and she did not offer her hand. "Captain," the word landed on him slowly. She outranked him, and she had not said it to put him in his place. She had said it the way you might mention the weather, as if it did not matter at all, as if he did not matter at all. Around them, a few soldiers had begun to notice. They were pretending not to watch in that way soldiers do, eyes forward, ears wide open. Because this was theater now. The great Titan had introduced himself, and this quiet woman had barely blinked. Titan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without being asked. He leaned back, spread his arms across the back of the chair, and studied her. Captain Carter, he repeated. I don't think I've seen you around here before. You knew? I'm here on assignment, she said. What kind of assignment? She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, Titan felt like the one being studied. The kind I'm not required to discuss with you, Sergeant. A ripple went through the nearby tables. Someone let out a low breath that might have been the start of a laugh, quickly swallowed. Titan heard it. Oh, he heard it, and the tightness in his chest turned warm and then hot. That's fine, he said, forcing a smile onto his face. I get it. Classified. I've handled more classified operations than most people in this building have had hot meals. Believe me, I understand keeping things quiet. He waited for her to ask, to lean in, to want to know about those operations. Everyone always wanted to know. Emily Carter took a sip of her coffee and said nothing. I've done 3 tours, Titan continued, because the silence was unbearable to him. Overseas, the kind of places where a wrong step means you don't come home. I've carried men out of fire. I've made calls that men twice my age couldn't make. I've got commendations that would take you 10 minutes just to read. That's a long time to spend reading about one person, Emily said. The words were so calm, so gentle, that it took him a full second to understand he had been cut. The men at the next table were no longer pretending. One of them, a young corporal, had his coffee halfway to his mouth and had simply stopped frozen watching. Titan leaned forward. The charm was slipping off his face like paint in the rain. Look, he said, lowering his voice. I don't know what your assignment is, Captain, and I don't need to. But let me give you a little advice. On this base, you want the right people on your side, and I'm the rightest person there is. You show a little respect and doors open for you. You keep sitting there like the world owes you something and, well, he spread his hands. Things get harder. Emily set down her coffee. She folded her hands on the table. And she looked at him with an expression that was not anger and was not fear. It was something worse for a man like Titan. It was patience, the kind of patience you show a child who does not yet understand what he has done. Sergeant Brooks, she said, your service deserves respect. I mean that. The tours, the sacrifices, the men you brought home, those are real and they matter. For half a second, Titan felt the warmth of being understood. But respect for your service, she went on, is not the same as permission to disrespect the people around you. And your rank, whatever you think it means, does not give you the right to lean on someone until they bend. The room went quiet in a way that a crowded room almost never does. Titan felt every eye on him. He felt the young corporal watching. He felt the whole architecture of his reputation built over so many years wobble on its foundation. And instead of stepping back, instead of walking away, instead of doing the one wise thing available to him, he did what pride always tells a man to do. He pushed harder. You've got a lot of opinions, he said, his voice climbing. For someone who walked in here yesterday, you don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know what it takes to do what I do. I know more than you think, Emily said. Oh yeah, what do you know? She did not raise her voice. That was the thing that would haunt him later. She never once raised her voice. I know that 8 months ago, she said, a junior soldier filed a complaint about you. He said you humiliated him in front of his unit until he asked to be transferred. That complaint disappeared. Titan's mouth went dry. I know, she continued, that there are 3 separate leadership reviews with your name on them. I know that at least 4 incidents involving what your own commanders called misuse of authority were quietly closed. I know that the last 2 soldiers who tried to report you were told unofficially that it would be better for their careers to let it go. The silence in that room was total now. Nobody was pretending anything anymore. Titan stared at her. His mind was racing, scrambling, trying to understand how this stranger, this woman he had never seen before this morning, could possibly know things that only senior commanders should have access to. Who are you, Piso? He said, and his voice had changed. The confidence was gone. What was left was something small and afraid hiding behind 100 pounds of muscle. I told you, she said. Captain Emily Carter. That's not what I'm asking. I know it isn't. She did not tell him. Not yet. She simply let him sit in the not knowing, which for a man used to controlling every room he entered was its own special kind of torture. Titan looked around. He saw the faces, the corporal, the two men at the next table, a group of young Marines by the door who had stopped to watch. And behind their eyes, he saw something he had never seen directed at him before. Not fear, not admiration, curiosity. They wanted to see what he would do. They wanted to see if the legend was real or if it was about to crack open in front of them. And Titan, God help him, could not stand to be watched and doubted at the same time. I don't know what game you're playing, he said, standing up so fast the chair scraped hard against the floor. But you don't get to come into my house and throw around lies. You don't get to sit there in your little plain uniform and act like you're better than every man in this room who's actually bled for this country. I never said I was better than anyone, Emily said, still seated, still calm. I said your rank doesn't make you untouchable. Those are different things. You think you can talk to me like that? I think, she said, that the fact you're this angry about being questioned tells me everything I came here to learn. Something flashed across his face. She had reached in and touched the exact nerve he spent every day trying to protect. Because underneath the Titan, underneath the medals and the muscle and the swagger, was a man who was terrified, absolutely terrified of being ordinary, of being seen, of someone looking past the show and finding out there was less behind it than everyone believed. And she had just told him in front of 100 witnesses that she saw it. You need to remember who you're talking to, he said. His voice dropped low and it was uglier, now meaner. Emily stood up. She was not tall. She did not need to be. She stood the way a person stands when they have never once relied on their size to make them safe. I know exactly who I'm talking to, she said. The question is whether you do. The young corporal at the next table set down his coffee very slowly and very quietly, the way you move when you sense that something is about to break. Word had spread. It always does on a base. In the space of a few minutes more, soldiers had drifted toward the doors into the hallways, filling the edges of the enormous room. It was almost the top of the hour, and a scheduled assembly meant that the huge training facility beyond the mess hall was already filling. Hundreds became many hundreds. The number that would later be reported and repeated and never forgotten was 1,040. 1,040 men and women who would, before the morning was over, witness something none of them would ever be able to explain the same way twice. But right now in this moment, it was just the two of them. A furious SEAL and a calm captain standing 3 feet apart while the whole world leaned in. You want to know what I think, Titan said. Not particularly, Emily replied. That did it. He took a step towards her. Just one. But it was the kind of step that changes the temperature of a room. The kind of step every soldier watching recognized in their gut. The young corporal was on his feet now, though he did not know why his body reacting before his brain could. You come in here, Titan said, and his finger was up now, pointing, jabbing the air near her face. You throw around accusations, you disrespect me in front of my own men, and you think there's no consequences. You think you're protected. You think that little bar on your collar means anything to me? Sergeant, Emily said, and for the first time there was a new note in her voice, not fear, a warning. You're going to want to step back now. Or what? Or you're going to do something you can't undo. He should have listened. Every man in that room, if you had frozen time and asked them, would have told you the same thing. Step back, Titan. Walk away. This is the moment. This is the door. Walk through it and save yourself. But pride does not know how to walk through doors. Pride only knows how to break through walls. He stepped closer. He was inches from her now. He could feel the whole room watching, and something in him decided that the only way out of this humiliation was to make her afraid. To make her small, to remind her and everyone else of what he was. Let me tell you something, Captain, he said, and there was a cruelty in it, now a genuine ugliness. Nobody talks to me like this. Not the men here, not their commanders, and definitely not you. So you're going to take your little papers and your little questions, and you're going to walk out of my mess hall, and you're going to remember what happened here today. You understand me? Emily looked at him, and then she said the thing that would echo through that base for years. Respect is not demanded, Sergeant. It's earned. And in the last 5 minutes, you have shown 1,000 people exactly how much of it you've actually earned. Something snapped behind his eyes. It was not a decision. That is what he would tell the investigators later, and it was the only true thing he said all day. It was not a decision. It was pride and shame and fear all crashing together in the space of a single heartbeat, and his hand moved before any wiser part of him could stop it. He reached out, and he grabbed her arm. His fingers closed around her forearm hard the way a man grabs when he wants another person to feel his strength. The whole room seemed to inhale at once. The young corporal took a step forward. An older sergeant near the wall said low and urgent, "Tight and don't," but he was too far gone now. Emily did not pull away. She did not flinch. She did not do any of the things a frightened person does. She looked down at his hand on her arm. Slowly, calmly, the way you might look at a fly that has landed on your dinner. Then she looked back up at him. "Sergeant Brooks," she said, and her voice was quieter than it had been all morning, which somehow made it louder in every ear that heard it. "Remove your hand." He did not. He tightened his grip. Because in his mind and the broken logic of his pride, letting go now meant losing. And Titan did not lose. Not on the battlefield, not in the mess hall, not in front of 1,040 people who had come to watch a legend and were now watching a man drown. He leaned in close. So close, she could feel his breath. And he said it. He said the words that he had used his whole life like a shield, like a key, like a crown. He said it loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Remember," he said, "I'm a Navy SEAL." And the terrible thing, the thing that no one in that room would ever forget, was the look on Emily Carter's face when he said it. She was not afraid. She was sad. For just a moment before everything happened, before the 4 seconds that would end his career and rewrite the legend of Titan forever, Captain Emily Carter looked at Daniel Brooks with something that was almost like pity, as if she had hoped right up until the very last second that he would choose differently. As if a part of her had wanted to give this man, with all his medals and all his fear, one more chance to be the person the young soldiers thought he was. But he had grabbed her arm. He had tightened his grip. He had said the word, and now there were no more chances left to give. The men who watched it would spend years arguing about what happened next. Some said she moved like water. Some said she moved like lightning. The truth was simpler and stranger than either. She moved like someone who had done this 10,000 times in training, in the dark, exhausted, until it was no longer a decision but a reflex carved into the deepest part of her body. There was no anger in it. That was what unsettled them the most later when they tried to describe it. There was no rage, no revenge, no wild swing of emotion. There was only precision, cold, clean, perfect precision. She freed her arm before he even understood she had moved. She used his own weight against him, the very strength he had been so proud of, the 100 extra pounds he had leaned into her to intimidate her. She redirected it, turned it, folded it back on itself. And the momentum that Titan had built to overpower a woman he thought was weak became the exact force that took him off his feet. 4 seconds. That was all it took. 4 seconds, and the heavily built, highly decorated, deeply feared staff sergeant Daniel Brooks was on the floor of his own mess hall staring up at the ceiling lights, the breath knocked clean out of his body, unable to understand how the world had turned upside down. The room did not cheer. That was the strangest part. In the movies, the crowd erupts. But this was not a movie. This was 1,040 real people watching something real. And there was no cheer, no applause, only a silence so complete you could have heard a pin drop from across the enormous hall. Because they were not watching a fight. They were watching a truth arrive. Emily Carter stood over him, and she was not breathing hard. She had not broken a sweat. She adjusted the cuff of her uniform where his hand had grabbed her, and she looked down at the man on the floor, and she did not gloat. She did not smile. She did not say a single cruel word. She simply said quietly enough that only the nearest soldiers heard it, but they would repeat it until the whole base knew it by heart. A real warrior knows the difference between strength and intimidation. Then she stepped back and she waited. She did not run. She did not call for help. She stood there in the ringing silence with the calm of someone who had known from the very first moment she walked into that mess hall exactly how this morning was going to end. On the floor, Titan blinked up at the lights. His ears were ringing. His pride, that great heavy thing he had carried his whole life, lay shattered around him where anyone could see the pieces. And in that moment, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Daniel Brooks felt something that no medal had ever protected him from. He felt seen. truly completely seen with all his armor stripped away in front of the 1,040 people whose fear and admiration he had spent his entire career collecting like trophies. And in the ringing silence, a single question began to form, not just in his mind, but in the mind of every soldier in that room. Who was she? Who was this quiet woman in the plain uniform who knew things she should not know? Who moved like no intelligence officer any of them had ever met, who had walked into the lion's den without a weapon and walked back out without a scratch? The young corporal who had watched the whole thing from the very first word turned to the sergeant beside him. His voice was barely a whisper. "Who is she?" he asked. The older man did not answer. He was staring at Emily Carter, and there was something in his face, a slow dawning, a suspicion beginning to take shape. Because he had heard rumors. Everyone had. Rumors of a special review. Rumors that someone was coming to the base. Rumors that certain names, certain protected names, certain untouchable names were finally about to answer for the things they had been getting away with for years. And as Emily Carter stood calmly in the center of that silent room waiting for the officers she knew were already on their way, the older sergeant realized that the rumors had not been rumors at all. They had been a warning, and Daniel Brooks, the great and terrible Titan, had walked straight into it with his eyes wide open and his pride leading the way. The doors at the far end of the hall burst open, boots on the floor, voices raised. The morning that had begun like any other was about to become the morning that Camp Pendleton would talk about for the rest of its history. And at the center of it all, one man lay on the ground, and one woman stood above him, and 1,038 witnesses stood frozen between them while waiting to learn the truth about who had really walked into that room that day. The truth that was about to change everything. The doors slammed against the walls, and 4 officers came through them fast, their eyes sweeping the room, and the first thing they saw was a decorated Navy SEAL flat on his back, and a quiet captain standing over him with her hands loose at her sides. For a moment, nobody moved. 1,038 witnesses held their breath. And the ranking officer among them, a colonel named Reyes with gray at his temples and 30 years of hard mornings behind him, stopped dead in his tracks and stared at the woman in the plain uniform. "Captain Carter," he said. He did not say it like a question. He said it like a man confirming something he had prayed all week he would not have to confirm. And every soldier in that room heard the way he said her name, and something cold began to travel from one end of the hall to the other, because Colonel Reyes did not talk to strangers like that. Colonel Reyes talked like that to people who scared him. Titan heard it too from the floor through the ringing in his ears. He heard the colonel say her name with something close to dread, and a small sick feeling opened up in his stomach. He rolled onto his side. He pushed himself up on one elbow. His whole body ached, not from the fall so much as from the humiliation of it, the impossible fact of it, and he looked up at Emily Carter, and he wanted more than he had ever wanted anything for her to be nobody. A fluke. A lucky nobody who had caught him off guard. But the colonel had said her name like a warning. "Colonel," Emily said, and she nodded to him, calm as ever. "I'm sorry you had to see this." "What happened here?" Reyes said, though his eyes were already moving over the scene, already doing the math. Before Emily could answer, Titan found his voice. He always found his voice. It had never once failed him, and it did not fail him now, even flat on the floor of his own mess hall. "She assaulted me," he said, dragging himself to his feet. "You all saw it. She put her hands on me. A superior officer and an enlisted whatever she is, she attacked me in front of the whole base. That's a court-martial. That's a career ender. I want her arrested right now." He looked around the room as he said it, and this was the old instinct, the reflex he had relied on for 20 years. Find the crowd, turn the crowd, make them see it your way. He had done it 100 times. A word here, a look there, and suddenly the whole unit remembered the story the way Titan wanted it remembered. But the crowd did not turn. That was the first thing that truly frightened him. Not the fall, not the colonel's voice, the silence of 1,000 faces that would not meet his eyes. "Nobody," Titan said, turning his voice climbing. "You all watched her attack me, and nobody's got anything to say." The young corporal at the front, the one who had watched the whole thing from the very first word, opened his mouth, and then quietly he closed it, because he had seen exactly what happened. He had seen Titan's fingers close around her arm. He had heard her tell him to let go, twice, and he had heard Titan lean in and say the words. Everyone had heard the words. Colonel Reyes turned to the corporal. "Son," he said, "you were closest. Tell me what you saw." The corporal's throat worked. He looked at Titan. He looked at the colonel. He looked at Emily Carter, who did not look back at him, who did not pressure him, who simply waited, and somehow her not looking made it easier. "He grabbed her, sir," the corporal said. The words came out small, but in that silence they landed like a hammer. "He grabbed her arm," the corporal went on, and now that he had started, he could not stop. "She told him to let go. She said it twice. He wouldn't. He said he told her to remember he was a SEAL, and then he tightened his grip, and she defended herself, sir. That's all it was. She defended herself." Titan's face went white, then red. "He's lying, Titan said. "He's a kid. He's scared of her. He doesn't know what he saw." "He knows what he saw," said a voice from the wall. It was the older sergeant, the one who had said Titan don't, in the seconds before it all went wrong. He stepped forward now, a man with more years on the base than most of the officers in the room, and he did not look at Titan with fear. He looked at him with something worse, disappointment. "I saw it too, Colonel," the older sergeant said. So did every man on this side of the hall. Brooks put his hands on her. She warned him. He doubled down. What happened after that was his own doing. Titan turned on him, and there was betrayal all over his face. "Mendez," he said, after everything, you're going to stand there and take her side." "I'm not taking anybody's side," Sergeant Mendez said quietly. "I'm telling the colonel what happened. There's a difference. You used to know the difference." That last line hung in the air, and something in Titan flinched at it because there had been a time, years ago, when he and Mendez had come up together, when they had been the kind of young men who would have thrown themselves in front of a bullet for each other. And now Mendez was looking at him like he was looking at a stranger. Like the man he'd known had died somewhere along the way and left this loud, frightened thing wearing his face. "This is unbelievable," Titan said, but his voice had lost something. The certainty was leaking out of it. You're all just gonna throw me under the bus because some woman walks in here and I don't even know who she is. I don't even know who she is." He shouted the last part and it echoed, and in the echo of it, Emily Carter finally spoke. "Colonel Reyes knows who I am," she said. "Don't you, Colonel?" Every head turned to Reyes, and the colonel, 30 years of hard mornings on his shoulders, let out a slow breath. He looked at Titan, and there was something almost gentle in his face, the way a doctor looks at a patient before delivering news that cannot be undone. "Brooks," Reyes said, "sit down." "I don't want to sit down." "Sit down, son. You're going to want to be sitting for this." And that, more than the fall, more than the corporal, more than Mendez, was the moment Titan felt the floor open up beneath him. Because he had spent his whole career reading men, and he could read this. He could read the pity in the colonel's voice. And a man does not use that voice unless he is about to tell you that everything you thought you knew is wrong. Titan did not sit down. He stood there swaying slightly, and he looked at Emily Carter, and he said very quietly in a voice that no longer sounded like Titan at all, "Who are you?" And this time she told him. "My name is Emily Carter," she said, "Captain United States Navy. But I'm not here as a captain sergeant. I'm here on the direct authority of the Office of the Inspector General. I've spent the last 3 years investigating the abuse of rank and authorities inside special operations units. Cases where good soldiers were driven out. Cases where complaints disappeared. Cases where men with reputations big enough to hide behind decided the rules were for everyone but themselves." The room had gone so quiet that her voice, though she never raised it, reached every corner. "I've been on this base for 6 days, she went on. "You didn't see me because you weren't looking. I've read every file. I've spoken to every soldier who was willing to talk to me, and a good number who were afraid to. And this morning, Sergeant Brooks, I sat down in that corner with a cup of coffee and a stack of documents because I wanted to see it for myself, one time, with my own eyes. The thing that 11 different soldiers had described to me, and no one had ever been willing to put their name to." She paused. "I wanted to see what you did when you thought no one who mattered was watching." Titan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "And you showed me," Emily said, "in front of 1,040 people. You showed me exactly who you are." The silence that followed was the longest 4 seconds of Daniel Brooks's life. Longer even than the 4 seconds on the floor, because in these 4 seconds, he understood. He understood the whole thing at once, the way a man understands a car crash the instant before it happens. She had not stumbled into his mess hall. She had not gotten lucky. She had come here for him. She had been building a case against him for 3 years and 6 days. And this morning he had walked up to her and grabbed her arm and handed her the last piece she needed gift wrapped in front of the largest audience of his entire career. "You," he said, and his voice cracked on the single word. "You set me up." "No," Emily said, and there was no triumph in it, only a tired kind of honesty. "I didn't set you up, Sergeant. I gave you every chance in the world to walk away. I told you to step back. I told you to remove your hand. I warned you that you were about to do something you couldn't undo. You could have turned around at any moment and none of this would be happening. I didn't set you up. I just stopped protecting you from yourself. That's a different thing." And the terrible truth of it was that she was right, and Titan knew she was right, and everyone in that room knew that, and there was nowhere left for him to hide. He looked around one more time, at the corporal, at Mendez, at the colonel, at 1,000 faces that had watched the legend of Titan die on the floor of a mess hall. And in that moment, cornered, humiliated, stripped of every shield he had ever owned, Daniel Brooks did the only thing his pride had ever taught him how to do. He attacked. "You want to talk about who I am?" he said, and his voice rose, and now there was real venom in it, the venom of a wounded animal. "Fine, let's talk about who I am. I'm the man who pulled 3 soldiers out of a burning vehicle in a place none of you could find on a map. I'm the man who carried a wounded kid 4 miles on a broken ankle because leaving him meant leaving him to die. I've done things for this country that would give every soft-handed investigator in Washington nightmares for the rest of their lives. And you, Captain, you want to end me over an argument in a lunchroom." "No," Emily said again, still calm, still steady. "I don't want to end you over an argument. And Sergeant, listen to me because this is important. Everything you just said might be true. The vehicle, the wounded kid, the 4 miles, I believe you. I've read your record, all of it, the good and the bad, and the good is real." She let that sit for a moment. "That's what makes this a tragedy," she said. "Not a scandal, a tragedy. Because you were a hero, and somewhere along the way you decided that being a hero once meant you got to be a bully forever. You decided the men you saved bought you the right to break the men you served with. And they don't. They never did. The kid you carried 4 miles doesn't give you the right to humiliate a 19-year-old private until he asked to transfer out of the only career he ever wanted." Titan flinched again, harder this time because she had named it. The private. He knew exactly which private. He had told himself 100 stories about that kid, that the kid was weak, that the kid couldn't cut it, that he'd done the kid a favor. And now here it was spoken out loud in the daylight in front of everyone. "That kid quit because he couldn't handle the pressure," Titan said, "but it came out weak, and he heard how weak it was. That kid," Emily said, "is named Private First Class Tyler Nguyen. He's 20 years old, and 3 months after he transferred out, he wrote a letter to the Inspector General's office describing what you did to him. It's 4 pages long. I have it memorized. Would you like me to read it to the room?" "No," Titan said too fast. "I didn't think so." And there it was, the first real crack. Not the fall, not the colonel, this. The moment when Titan chose not to have the letter read aloud, and everyone in the room understood that the letter was true because a man who is innocent does not flinch from the evidence. A man who is innocent says yes, read it, read every word. Colonel Reyes stepped forward now. He put a hand on Titan's shoulder, and it was not a rough hand. It was the hand of a man who had known Daniel Brooks for a long time and was watching him fall and could not stop it. "Brooks," Reyes said low, just for him, though the room was silent enough to hear, "I'm going to need your sidearm and your ID. You're relieved of duty pending investigation. This isn't me choosing sides. This is procedure. You know it is." "Reyes," Titan's voice broke completely now. "Come on, Frank, we've known each other 20 years. You're going to do this to me over her." "I'm not doing anything to you," Reyes said quietly. "You did this. All I'm doing is what the situation requires. And Dan, I'll tell you the truth because you and I go back far enough that you deserve the truth. If half of what's in those files is real, I should have done this 2 years ago. And the fact that I didn't, the fact that a lot of us didn't, that's on us. We let you get this big. We let it slide because you were Titan, because you had the medals, because it was easier to look away. That's our shame to carry. But the man on the floor 5 minutes ago, that was all you." The words went into Titan like a knife precisely because they were kind. If Reyes had shouted, he could have shouted back. If Reyes had condemned him, he could have played the victim. But Reyes was not condemning him. Reyes was grieving him. And there is no defense against grief. Titan reached down slowly and unclipped his sidearm. His hands were shaking, and he hated that they were shaking, and he could not make them stop. He handed it over. He handed over his ID. And with each thing he surrendered, a little more of the Titan drained out of him, until what was left standing in the middle of that mess hall was just a man, just Daniel Brooks. Just a scared, tired man who had built his whole life on a foundation of fear and had woken up this morning to find it washing away beneath his feet. And then something happened that no one expected. Titan turned to Emily Carter, and instead of rage, instead of one more attack, his face crumpled, and he said in a voice that barely carried past the first row, "I don't know how to be anything else." The whole room heard it, and nobody breathed. "You want to know the truth," he said, and there were tears standing in his eyes now. The first tears anyone on that base had ever seen from Titan. "You want the real truth, Captain. I don't know who I am without this, without the reputation, without the fear. When I was that kid carrying the other kid 4 miles, I knew who I was. I was somebody who mattered. And then I came home and the mission stopped. And the only way I could still feel like that guy was to make sure everybody in every room I walked into knew what I'd done. And it worked. For a while. Fear feels a lot like respect if you don't look too close. And I stopped looking close. I stopped looking close a long time ago." Emily Carter did not say anything. For the first time all morning, she did not have an answer ready, because this was not in the files. This was not in the 4-page letter, or the 11 interviews, or the 3 years of investigation. This was a man breaking open in real time, and even she who had come here to hold him accountable was not prepared for the sound of it. "I hurt that kid," Titan said. "Gwen, I know I did. I knew it while I was doing it. And I told myself a story about it because the alternative was admitting that I'd turned into exactly the kind of man I used to hate. The kind of man who leaned on people who couldn't lean back." He wiped his face with the back of his hand, roughly angry at his own tears. "I became the bully captain. I spent my whole life fighting bullies overseas, and I came home and I became one. And nobody stopped me, because I made sure nobody could." He looked at Mendez then, his old friend. "You tried," Titan said, "didn't you, a couple years back? You said something to me. You said, 'Dan, you're getting mean.' And I told you to mind your own business. I threatened you, basically. My own friend." Mendez nodded slowly. "You did," he said. There was no anger in it, just old sadness. "I'm sorry," Titan said, and then louder to the room, to all of them, "I'm sorry." And here is the thing about that moment, the thing that made 1,040 people go home that night and tell someone they loved about what they had seen. It would have been easy, so easy to hate Daniel Brooks. He had earned it. But it is a strange and unbearable thing to watch a man discover all at once in public that he has become the villain of his own story. There is no cheer in that. There is only the quiet, aching recognition that this could happen to anyone. That pride is patient. That fear can wear the mask of strength for years before someone finally reaches out and pulls it off. Emily Carter looked at the broken man in front of her, and she made a choice that not everyone in her position would have made. She stepped toward him, not far, but enough. "Sergeant Brooks," she said, and her voice had changed. It was still calm, still steady, but there was something new underneath it now. "What happens next is going to be hard. There's going to be an investigation. There are going to be consequences, and some of them are going to be permanent, and I'm not going to stand here and pretend otherwise, because you deserve the truth, and the truth is that you can't undo what you did to Nguyen or the others. You can't." Titan nodded. He knew. "But," she said, and the whole room leaned in on that single word, "but what you just did right now in front of all these people, admitting it, owning it, that's the first honest thing I've watched you do all morning. And it's more courage than the fall took, I promise you that. Anybody can lose a fight. Not many men can lose the story they've told about themselves their whole life and still stand up straight while they do it." Titan stared at her. He had come at her with everything, his rank, his medals, his fear, his rage, and none of it had moved her an inch. And now, when he had nothing left, when he was empty and shaking and stripped down to the bone, she was the only person in that room offering him something that looked like grace. "Why," he said, "why would you say that to me? After everything, why would you give me anything?" And Emily Carter looked at him for a long moment, And then she said something that landed in that room like a stone dropped into a deep, still well. Because 10 years ago, she said, there was a man exactly like you, and I was the private who couldn't lean back. The silence that followed was absolute. Titan's eyes widened. You think I do this for the paperwork? Emily said, and for the first time the smallest tremor entered her voice, the first crack in the calm she had worn like armor all morning. You think I spent 3 years chasing men like you across a dozen bases because I enjoy it? I do it because when I was 20 years old, a man with your exact reputation put his hands on me and warned me and reminded me who he was, and every single person in the room looked at the floor. Nobody said anything. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody stood up. And it took me years, Sergeant. Years to understand that the silence hurt worse than the hand did. She took a breath. So I promised myself something, she said. I promised myself that I would learn to defend myself so well that no man would ever put his hands on me again. And I did. You felt that this morning. But I also promised myself something harder. I promised that I would become the person who walks into the room and does not look at the floor. The one who writes it down, the one who stands up, so that the next 20-year-old private wouldn't have to spend years learning that their silence was the loudest sound in the room. She looked at Titan and her eyes were wet, and she did not wipe them. I didn't come here to destroy you, she said. I came here for every person you made feel the way that man made me feel. And I'll tell you the truth, Sergeant, the same truth I'd want if I were standing where you are. I don't hate you, I understand you. That's worse, isn't it? I understand exactly how a scared kid who wanted to matter turns into a man who makes other people feel small. I've studied it my whole adult life. And understanding you is the thing that makes me absolutely certain you have to be stopped. Because I know how it ends if nobody stops it. I've read the last chapter of your story. And it isn't the vehicle, and it isn't the 4 miles. It's a whole generation of soldiers who leave the only thing they ever loved because one man couldn't tell the difference between being respected and being feared. Nobody in that room moved. Colonel Reyes had gone very still. Sergeant Mendez had his jaw clenched tight. The young corporal at the front had tears on his face and did not seem to know it. And Daniel Brooks, the man they had called Titan, looked at Emily Carter, the woman who had knocked him to the floor, and then impossibly handed him back the only thing he had left, which was the chance to become someone better. And he understood finally completely that she had never once been his enemy. She had been the first person in 20 years to treat him like a man worth saving. What do I do? He said. His voice was barely a whisper. Tell me what I'm supposed to do now. And Emily Carter, Captain United States Navy, the private who had once had no one to lean back on, looked at the broken warrior in front of her, and she gave him the only answer that had ever mattered. You start, she said, by telling the truth. All of it, even the parts that end your career, especially those. You sit down with the investigators, and you don't spin it, and you don't hide, and you name every single person you ever made smaller than they deserve to be. And then you spend whatever's left of your life trying to become the man those young soldiers thought you were when you walked into a room. It won't fix what you broke, nothing will. But it's the only road that goes anywhere but down. And Sergeant, believe me, I know. I've watched a lot of men come to this exact crossroad, and I can already tell you something about yourself that you don't know yet. What? Titan said. Emily almost smiled. You're going to take the hard road, she said. I can see it in you. The same thing that made you carry that kid 4 miles on a broken ankle. It's still in there. It got buried under 20 years of fear, but it's still in there, and it just woke up. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Daniel Brooks felt something in his chest that was not fear pretending to be strength. It was small. It was fragile. It was barely there at all. But it was real. And as Colonel Reyes gently took his arm to lead him from the room, past 1,040 silent witnesses, past the corporal and past Mendez, and past everyone who had watched the legend of Titan die, and something more honest begin to be born in its place, Daniel Brooks turned around one last time and looked at the woman who had ended him and saved him in the same 4 seconds. Captain Carter, he said. Yes, Sergeant. He swallowed hard. The man, he said, 10 years ago, the one who put his hands on you. Did anyone ever stop him? And the whole room held its breath because every single person felt the weight of the question, felt that the answer to it was somehow the answer to everything. Emily Carter was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, no, nobody ever did. And in the silence that followed, 1,040 people, understood all at once exactly why she had walked into that lion's den without a weapon and without a shred of fear, and exactly why she would keep walking into rooms like it for the rest of her life. Because somewhere right now, there was a 20-year-old private staring at the floor. And Captain Emily Carter had made a promise a long time ago that she intended to keep one room at a time, one Titan at a time, for as long as it took. They led Titan out through the side door, and for a moment, it seemed like the hard part was over. It was not. Because as the door closed behind Colonel Reyes and the broken man he was guiding, a voice rose up from the middle of the crowd, a hard voice, an angry one. So that's it. Everyone turned. A tall staff sergeant had stepped forward, a man named Kowalski, thick through the shoulders with a face like a clenched fist. He had come up under Titan. He had modeled himself on Titan, and he had watched for the last 20 minutes everything he believed in fall apart on the floor of that mess hall, and he was not ready to let it go. That's it, Kowalski said again louder, looking straight at Emily Carter. You walk in here, you humiliate one of the best operators this base has ever produced. You put him on the ground in front of everybody, and now we're all just supposed to clap for you. Call you a hero. The room shifted. The energy that had been grief a moment ago turned tense, uncertain, dangerous. Because Kowalski was not alone. There were others like him. Men who had built their whole identity on being close to Titan and who understood correctly that if Titan could fall, so could they. Emily Carter did not step back. She turned to face him fully. I didn't ask anyone to clap, Sergeant, she said, and I'm not a hero. I'm an investigator doing a job I wish didn't need doing. Save the speech, Kowalski said. You want to know what I saw? I saw a woman with a chip on her shoulder come after a good man because she could. You said it yourself. 10 years ago, somebody hurt you. So now every guy with medals on his chest has to pay for it. That's not justice, Captain. That's revenge with paperwork. A murmur ran through part of the crowd. Not agreement exactly, but not disagreement either. And Emily Carter understood in that instant that the fight in the mess hall had been the easy one. This was the real one. This was the fight for what 1,040 people would decide the morning had meant. You think this is about revenge? She said, I know it is. Then let me ask you something, Sergeant Kowalski. She said his name, and he flinched because he had not told her his name, and the fact that she knew it meant she had read about him too, meant she had files on him too, and that landed exactly the way she needed it to. If a man grabs a woman's arm and won't let go after she asks him twice, and she defends herself, and she puts him down without hurting him, more than his own pride, is that revenge? Or is that just what happens when you put your hands on someone who knows how to make you stop? Kowalski opened his mouth. Because here's what I keep hearing, Emily pressed on, and now her pace picked up and she gave him no room. I keep hearing men say I humiliated him. I didn't humiliate Daniel Brooks. Daniel Brooks humiliated Daniel Brooks. I was drinking coffee. He came to me. I asked him to let go. He said no. Every single decision that led to him being on that floor was a decision he made out loud in front of you. So tell me, Sergeant, which part of that was revenge, the coffee, the asking him twice? Be specific. Kowalski had no answer, and the crowd saw that he had no answer, and something in the temperature of the room began slowly to turn back. But Kowalski was not the kind of man who backed down when he was losing. He was the kind who got louder. You don't get it, he said. You people never get it. Out there in the real world, the world you investigators only read about in your air-conditioned offices, intimidation keeps men alive. You think we're gentle out there, you think we say please and thank you when the shooting starts. Titan was hard, because hard is what keeps you breathing, and you want to punish him for bringing that home. And this finally was the argument underneath all the other arguments. This was the thing Kowalski actually believed, the thing a lot of men in that room half believed, and Emily Carter knew it, and she knew that if she did not answer it right now, cleanly, completely, then the story of this morning would rot into something ugly the moment everyone walked out the door. So she took a breath, and she gave him the truth. You're right, she said. Kowalski blinked. He had not expected that. You're right that out there hard keeps you alive, Emily said. You're right that the battlefield doesn't care about your feelings. I've read the after-action reports, Sergeant. I know what those men did overseas. I know what Titan did. And I will stand here and tell every person in this room that the hardness that carried that kid 4 miles on a broken ankle is a sacred thing, and I would never ever ask a warrior to give it up. She let that sit for exactly 1 second. But here's what you are missing, she said, and her voice dropped and somehow got harder than any shout. The hardness is a tool, it's not a personality. A good operator picks it up when the shooting starts and he puts it down when he comes home. That's the whole job. That's the discipline. Anybody can be hard when they're scared. It takes a real warrior to be gentle when he's safe. Titan forgot how to put the tool down. He carried the battlefield into a lunchroom and pointed it at a 20-year-old kid who never fired a shot at him. And you want to call that keeping men alive? That kid didn't feel alive, Sergeant. That kid felt like he was back in the exact situation your hardness is supposed to protect people from. You didn't protect Nguyen. One of your own turned into the threat. The room was dead silent again. So no, Emily said, I'm not punishing Daniel Brooks for being hard. I'm holding him accountable for never learning to put it down. And if you can't tell the difference between those two things, Sergeant Kowalski, then I've got a file with your name on it, and I'd love to sit down with you next. It was not a threat. It was worse than a threat. It was an invitation delivered calmly in front of everyone, and Kowalski understood exactly what it meant. It meant she was not afraid of him. It meant she had come prepared for him. It meant that the thing he had counted on his whole career, his size, his volume, the fear he could put into a room did not work on this woman, and had never worked on this woman, and everyone was watching him discover it. Kowalski's jaw worked. His hands opened and closed at his sides. And for one terrible second, the whole room wondered if he was going to make the same mistake Titan had made, if he was going to be dumb enough and proud enough to actually step toward her. He didn't. Instead, something happened that surprised even Emily. A voice came from behind Kowalski, a younger man's voice shaking a little but clear. He's right about one thing, Captain. It was a young sergeant, maybe 25, and every eye swung to him. About it being hard out there, but he's wrong about Titan. The young man swallowed. I was in Titan's unit 18 months ago, and I watched him do to another guy exactly what everybody's describing. And I didn't say anything because I was scared. And that guy, he's not in the Navy anymore. He got out. And I always told myself it wasn't my business. His voice cracked. But it was my business. It was all of our business. And I'm sick of pretending it wasn't. He turned to Kowalski. You want to defend him, Ski, that's on you. But I'm done. I've been done for a year and a half, and I was too much of a coward to say it. I'm not doing it anymore. And that was the crack in the dam, because the next voice came from the left side of the room, a woman, a corpsman. Me too, she said. He cornered me in a supply room a year ago, said things. I never reported it because who was going to believe me over Titan? And then another voice, and another. It was not a flood. It was slower than that and more painful and more real. One at a time from all corners of that enormous room, soldiers who had spent years swallowing what they had seen began haltingly to speak. Not because it was safe, it still didn't feel safe, but because for the first time someone had walked into the room and not looked at the floor. And courage, it turns out, is contagious in exactly the same way that fear is. Emily Carter stood in the middle of it and listened. And this, more than the fall, more than any of it, was the thing she had come 3 years and 6 days to see. Not Titan on the floor. This, the silence breaking, the floor full of eyes finally lifting up. Colonel Reyes had come back into the room somewhere in the middle of it, having handed Titan off to the investigators, and he stood in the doorway and watched his base confess its long, quiet complicity, and his face was gray because he understood that every one of these stories had happened on his watch in his house under his command. And he had not known, or worse, he had half known and had chosen the easier thing, which was not to look. When the voices finally slowed, when the room had emptied itself of the poison it had been carrying for years, Colonel Reyes stepped forward. And to his enormous credit, he did not defend himself. He did not explain. He did the hardest thing a commander can do. He owned it. I heard all of that, he said, and his voice was rough. Every word. And I want to say something, and I want every one of you to hear it because you've earned the right to hear it from me and not from a memo. He paused. I failed you. Nobody moved. I'm the commanding officer of this installation, Reyes said, which means everything that happens here is my responsibility, the good and the bad. And what I just heard is that for years, people under my command were hurting other people under my command, and the ones getting hurt didn't believe I would protect them. And you know the worst part? They were right not to believe it, because I didn't protect them. I looked at Daniel Brooks, and I saw the medals and the record, and I decided the complaints were probably exaggerated. Probably a personality thing. Probably something that would work itself out. I chose the comfortable lie, and you paid for it. He looked around the room, and there were tears in the eyes of a 30-year veteran, and he did not hide them. That ends today, Reyes said. Not because Captain Carter caught us. Because it should have ended years ago, and I was too proud and too comfortable to end it. Anyone, and I mean anyone on this base who has a story like the ones I just heard, my door is open. Not the suggestion box, my actual door. And I will personally make sure it goes where it needs to go. You have my word, and I understand my word doesn't mean much to some of you right now. And I'm going to spend the rest of my time in this uniform earning it back. It was in its way as remarkable as anything Emily Carter had done, because it is a rare thing to watch a powerful man choose accountability when he could have chosen to protect himself. And the room felt it. You could feel the thing shift, feel a base that had been sick with silence for years begin in real time to heal. But Emily Carter knew something the room did not. She knew that speeches were the easy part. She had seen 100 commanders give beautiful speeches and then quietly go back to protecting the exact men they'd promised to hold accountable the moment the investigators drove off the base. So while Reyes was still speaking, she made a decision. When he finished, she stepped forward. "Colonel," she said, "can I say one more thing to your people?" Reyes nodded. "The floor's yours, Captain." "God knows you've earned it." Emily turned to the room, and she did not give a speech. She did something harder. "Everyone who spoke up just now," she said. "Everyone who told a story they've been carrying. I need you to understand something, and I need you to really hear it because it's the most important thing I'll say all day." She paused. "In about an hour, I'm going to get in a car and I'm going to drive off this base. And when I do, all of you are going to still be here, together. And the question of whether today mattered isn't going to be decided by me or by the investigation or even by the colonel. It's going to be decided by you, tomorrow morning and the morning after that." The room was silent, hanging on every word. "Because here's the truth about men like Daniel Brooks," she said. "They don't survive on their own strength. They never have. They survive on everybody else's silence. Titan wasn't powerful because he was strong. He was powerful because 1,000 good people decided every single day that it was easier to look at the floor. He built his whole kingdom out of your silence. And the second you stopped giving it to him, he fell in 4 seconds. 4 seconds. That's how fragile the whole thing was the entire time." She let that land. "So don't clap for me," she said. "Please. Clapping for me lets you off the hook. It turns this into a story about one special investigator who came and fixed your base and drove away. That's a lie. I didn't fix anything. I just held up a mirror. The fix is you, all of you. Every time one of you decides tomorrow, next week, next year to be the person in the room who doesn't look at the floor. That's the fix. There is no other one. There never was." And then Captain Emily Carter did something no one expected. She came to attention, and she saluted them. The whole room, the privates and the corporals and the sergeants and the young man who had confessed and the corpsman who had spoken, and even at the edges, the men like Kowalski who had come at her hard. "It's an honor," she said, "to be in a room with people brave enough to finally tell the truth. That took more courage than anything I did this morning. I mean that." For a moment, nobody moved. And then slowly 1,040 people came to attention and returned her salute. Even Kowalski. Especially in the end, Kowalski, whose face had gone through something in the last few minutes, some slow and painful reckoning that would take him weeks to fully understand. And in that moment, the meaning of the morning was decided. Not as the story of a woman who beat a seal, but as the story of the day a base stopped looking at the floor. Emily lowered her hand. She turned to gather her documents from the corner table, the same table where she had been sitting with her coffee a lifetime ago when the morning had begun like any other. And as she picked up her stack of files, the young corporal from the very front, the one who had been the first to tell the truth, approached her carefully. "Captain," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "The guy," he said, 10 years ago, the one who hurt you." He hesitated. "You said nobody ever stopped him. Is that really true? He just got away with it?" Emily paused her hand on the files, and the room, which had begun to murmur and move, went quiet again because everyone wanted to hear this answer. For a long time, yes, she said. He got away with all of it. He made rank, he got medals. He kept doing to other people what he did to me for years, and every time the room looked at the floor, just like this room used to. What happened to him? The corporal asked. And Emily Carter did something she had not done all morning. She smiled. But it was not a warm smile. It was something older and heavier than that. 4 years ago, she said, a young investigator was assigned to review conduct in his unit. She'd been on the job about 6 months. She was nervous. She almost asked to be reassigned because she didn't think she was ready. Emily's voice was very steady. But she went, and she sat in a corner with a cup of coffee, and she watched him grab a young sailor by the collar and threaten her. And this time somebody wrote it down. The corporal's eyes widened. That was you, he said. You were the investigator. I was, Emily said. So you, the young man breathed. You went after the exact man who... I did, she said. It took me 6 years to be ready. 6 years of training, of transferring into the right office, of learning the law well enough that they couldn't bury it, of becoming the kind of person who could walk into his room and not be afraid. And then I went and I got him. Him first, before anyone else. He was the first case I ever closed. The room had stopped breathing entirely. He, the corporal said, is he still? He's in Leavenworth, Emily said quietly, serving 11 years. And do you know what he said to me when it was finally over, when they were leading him away, same as they led Brooks away this morning? She paused. He said, I don't even remember you. And he was telling the truth. He didn't remember me. I was that small to him, one sailor out of dozens, a face at the edge of a room he barely glanced at. She picked up her files and held them against her chest. And I looked at him, she said, and I told him the truth right back. I said, I know you don't remember me. That's exactly why I'll never forget you. Because you taught me the most important lesson of my whole life. You taught me that the ones who do the most damage never remember the people they damage. And the ones who get damaged never ever forget. That's the whole thing right there. That's why the silence has to break. Because they forget us. But we don't forget. And as long as even one of us is willing to remember out loud, in a room full of people who'd rather look at the floor, then men like you don't get to win. She let out a slow breath. He didn't say anything after that, Emily said. There wasn't anything to say. The corporal stood there, and there were tears running freely down his face now, and he was not ashamed of them, and neither was anyone watching him. Thank you, he said, for not looking at the floor. Emily Carter looked at the young man, and for just a second, the armor came all the way off, and 1,040 people saw the 20-year-old private she had once been, the one who had waited so long for someone, anyone to stand up for her, and had finally decided that if no one would, then she would become that someone herself for everyone who came after. Thank you, she said, for being the first one in this room to stand up. You have no idea, son. You have no idea what you just did for the people who are going to serve here after you're gone. That's the real courage. Not mine, yours. You went first when going first was still dangerous. Never forget that you did that. And as she walked toward the doors, her boots steady on the same floor where a legend had fallen an hour before, the room did not part in fear the way it had always parted for Titan. It leaned toward her, hands reached out and touched her shoulder as she passed. Voices quiet and rough and grateful murmured, thank you, and I'm sorry, and I won't stay silent again. And somewhere in the middle of that long walk to the door, through a sea of people who would carry this morning inside them for the rest of their lives, Captain Emily Carter understood that she had finally, after all these years, done the thing she had promised, that frightened 20-year-old girl she would one day do. She had walked into the lion's den, and she had walked out with the whole pride following behind her into the light. She reached the doors, but she did not walk through them, because a phone was ringing, Colonel Reyes's phone, and the way his face changed as he answered it made every conversation in the room die at once. Reyes, he said, then a pause, then say that again. The color drained out of his face. He listened for a long 10 seconds, and his eyes lifted slowly and found Emily Carter standing at the door, and something in his expression made her set her files back down on the nearest table. Understood, Reyes said. Yes, she's still here, I'll tell her. He hung up, and the whole room waited. Captain Carter, Reyes said carefully, that was the base hospital. It's about Brooks. Emily went very still. What about him? On the way to processing, he collapsed. They're saying it looks like a cardiac event. He's in the ICU. They're saying it's serious. A gasp moved through the room, because whatever anyone had felt about Titan an hour ago, whatever anger or fear or betrayal, the news landed on all of them the same way. He was still one of theirs. He had still carried that kid 4 miles. And now he might be dying in a hospital bed a quarter mile from where he'd fallen. Kowalski was the first to move. "I'm going," he said, already heading for the door. "Sergeant?" Emily's voice stopped him. "Wait." He turned and there was fury in his face again. The old fury looking for somewhere to land. "Wait, he's dying, Captain. You did this. You put him on the floor. You took his whole life apart in front of everybody, and now his heart's giving out. And you want me to wait?" The accusation hung in the air, and Emily felt the room tilt again, felt the meaning of the morning suddenly up for grabs all over again. Because if Daniel Brooks died today, then no matter what he had done, some part of every person in this room would always quietly blame the woman who had brought him down. She did not flinch from it. "You think I did this to him?" she said. "I think his heart didn't give out until you got done with him," Kowalski shot back. And Emily Carter nodded slowly, because it was a fair thing to feel, even if it was not a true thing to believe. "Sergeant Kowalski," she said, "I'm going to tell you something and I need you to hear it, because you're about to walk into that hospital and you're going to want to have this straight in your head." She stepped toward him. "A man's heart doesn't break in one morning. What happened to Daniel Brooks in that ICU started years ago. It started every night he lay awake knowing what he'd become and couldn't stop. It started every time he made someone smaller and hated himself a little more for it. It started every time he had to be louder and harder and more feared because the quiet was unbearable. I didn't break his heart this morning, Sergeant. I just took away the noise he'd been using to drown out the sound of it breaking." Kowalski stared at her, breathing hard. "But you're right about one thing," Emily said. "You should go. He shouldn't be alone. Nobody should be alone at a moment like this, no matter what they've done. So go, sit with him. And Kowalski," she held his eyes, "if he can hear you, tell him something for me." "Why would I do anything for you?" Kowalski said, but there was no force in it anymore. "Because it's not for me," Emily said. "It's for him. Tell him the road's still there. Tell him exactly that. He'll know what it means. Tell him the hard road is still there, and it's not too late to take it, and I meant every word I said. Tell him." Something passed over Kowalski's face, some crack in the armor he had inherited from the very man now lying in that hospital bed. He gave one short, hard nod, and then he was gone through the doors at a dead run. The room was in chaos now, quiet chaos, the kind where nobody knows what to do with their hands. Emily turned to Reyes. "Colonel, I need to be there too." Reyes frowned. "Captain, with respect, given the circumstances, given that you're the investigating officer, and if this becomes a fatality inquiry, you being in that room could compromise." "I know exactly what it could compromise," Emily said. "I've spent 3 years being careful about exactly those things. And I'm telling you, I need to bow anyway, and I'll document every second of it, and if it costs me the case, then it costs me the case." Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something the whole room could hear. "Because I told that man this morning that I understood him. And I did. And if I meant it, if any of it was real and not just something I said to win the room, then I don't get to hide behind procedure now that it's inconvenient. Understanding a person means you show up when it's hard, Colonel, not just when it makes you look good." Reyes looked at her for a long moment, and then slowly he understood something about Captain Emily Carter that he had not understood before. She had not come to this base to destroy Titan. She had genuinely, truly come to save the next Titan, and that meant she could not turn her back on this one, even now, even at the cost of everything. "Go," Reyes said quietly. "I'll handle the documentation myself. You go." She went. The walk to the hospital took 4 minutes, and Emily Carter spent every one of them thinking about a man she had met 2 hours ago and would never fully understand and could not apparently stop caring about. She thought about the tears in his eyes when he'd said, "I don't know how to be anything else." She thought about the boy who carried the other boy 4 miles. She thought about the terrible arithmetic of a life, how a person could do the bravest thing imaginable at 22 and the cruelest thing imaginable at 40, and how both of those things could be true about the same heart at the same time. When she reached the ICU, Kowalski was standing outside the room and his eyes were red. "They won't let me in yet," he said. "They're working on him. It's bad, Captain. They said his something about his heart, it just stopped for a minute. They got it going again, but—" Emily nodded, and then she asked the question she was afraid to ask. "Did you get to tell him before he collapsed in the hallway? Did anybody get to say anything to him?" Kowalski's face crumpled. "He said something," Kowalski said, "in the hallway. Right before, I was walking behind him in the escort. And he stopped and he turned around and he looked at me and he said," Kowalski's voice broke. He said, "Ski, I'm sorry for all of it. Tell the young guys not to turn out like me." And I said, "Come on, Titan, you're going to be fine. We'll figure this out." And he just looked at me and he said, "I finally figured it out, Ski. 2 hours too late. But I figured it out." Kowalski wiped his face roughly and then he just went down, just like that, right in the hallway. Emily closed her eyes. 2 hours too late. That was the thing, wasn't it? That was the thing about all of it. The waste of it. A man could spend 40 years being the wrong thing and then understand in a single morning exactly how to be the right thing and have his body give out before he ever got the chance to prove it. There was no justice in that. There was no lesson in that. There was just the aching, unbearable arithmetic of a life that had turned the corner too late. But Emily Carter had not spent 3 years chasing men like Daniel Brooks across a dozen bases because she believed in too late. She turned to Kowalski. "Listen to me," she said. "You listen. It is not too late. Do you hear me? A man who says I finally figured it out is not finished. A man who says tell the young guys not to turn out like me has already started doing the only thing that matters, which is trying to protect the people who come after him. That's the road. He's already on it. His body doesn't get to decide whether the road counts. We decide that, you and me and everyone in that mess hall. We decide whether Daniel Brooks's last 2 hours meant something or not." Kowalski stared at her. "You said you hated what I did to him," Emily said. "Fine, hate it. But then go do something with that. Because there are 100 young soldiers on this base right now who are watching how this ends. And if it ends with everybody deciding Titan was a monster and good riddance, then his whole life was a waste, and everything he figured out this morning dies with him. But if it ends with even one of those young guys hearing the story of a hard man who finally learned to put the hardness down, then Daniel Brooks did something in his last 2 hours that he never managed to do in the 20 years before. He saved somebody. One more time, off the battlefield this time. That's up to us now, Sergeant. Not his heart. Us." And Kowalski, the man who had come at her hardest, the man who had built his whole self on the legend of Titan, looked at Captain Emily Carter, and something inside him that had been clenched into a fist his whole adult life slowly, painfully began to open. "Why do you care?" he said. "That's what I don't get. After what he did to you, after what men like him did to you, why do you care whether he lives or dies? Why aren't you glad?" And this was the question, the real one. The one underneath every other question of the whole long morning. And Emily Carter answered it the only way she knew how, which was completely and honestly with the last of the armor gone. "Because being glad is what he would do," she said quietly. "Titan 10 years ago, if his enemy was dying, he'd have been glad. That's what small men do. They celebrate when the people who hurt them fall. And I decided a long time ago in a supply room, 20 years old with a man's hand around my throat, that whatever I became, I would not become that. I would not let him make me into a smaller version of himself. That was the one thing I swore. He could take a lot from me. He didn't get to take that." She looked through the window into the ICU where a team of people were fighting to keep a broken man's heart beating. "So no, Sergeant, I'm not glad. I'm standing in a hospital hallway hoping a man who assaulted me this morning gets to live because caring about him is the only proof I have that he never actually won. That's why I'm here. That's the whole reason. It was never about beating Titan. It was about refusing for my entire life, no matter what it cost me, to become him." And in the silence of that hallway with the monitors beeping steadily behind the glass, Kowalski finally understood the thing that 1,040 people had been trying to understand all morning. He understood why she had walked into that mess hall without fear. He understood why she had offered a broken man grace when she could have offered him nothing. He understood that the strongest person he had ever seen in his life had never once needed to raise her voice because real strength never does. He sat down slowly in a plastic chair in the hallway, And after a moment, Captain Emily Carter sat down beside him. And the two of them, the investigator and the true believer, the woman who had brought Titan down and the man who had worshipped him, sat side by side in the fluorescent quiet and waited together to learn whether Daniel Brooks would get the chance to walk the road he had found 2 hours too late. Behind the glass, a heart monitor beeped. Steady, then irregular, then steady again. And they waited. They waited for 3 hours. 3 hours in plastic chairs under fluorescent lights, while a team of doctors fought to keep a heart beating that had spent 40 years being the wrong kind of strong. Kowalski did not speak much. Emily did not push him to. Every so often a nurse would pass and both of them would look up, and every time the nurse would shake her head, "Not yet, we don't know yet," and they would settle back into the waiting. Somewhere in the second hour, Colonel Reyes arrived. He did not say anything either. He just took the chair on the other side of Emily and sat down, a 3-star weight of command folding itself into a waiting room chair like any other worried man, and the three of them sat there together, and outside the base kept moving, and the story of the morning kept spreading. And none of that mattered to the three people in the hallway who were waiting to find out if a man they had every reason to hate was going to live. At the top of the third hour, the door opened and a doctor came out, a tired woman in her 50s with blood on her sleeve that she had not noticed. And the way she looked at them told them everything before she said a single word. "He's stable," she said. The breath went out of all three of them at once. "It was bad," the doctor went on. "I'm not going to lie to you. His heart stopped twice. The second time, it was closer than I'd like. But we got him back and he's stable now. And if the next 24 hours go the way I think they will, he's going to make it." She paused. "He's very lucky. And whatever's been going on with this man, whatever kind of week he's been having, I'd tell him to make some changes. A heart doesn't do what his did without a whole lot of years of warning behind it." Emily closed her eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, Captain Emily Carter, who had spent her whole adult life being the calm one, the steady one, the one who never let anyone see her crack, felt her chin tremble. Just slightly, just for a second. And then she got it back under control, the way she always did. But Reyes saw it, and he did not say anything. He just reached over and very briefly put his hand on her shoulder, soldier to soldier, and she let him. "Can we see him?" Kowalski asked. "One at a time, and not for long." The doctor looked at them. "He's awake, he's weak, and he's on a lot of medication, but he's awake, and he's asking for someone." She checked a small notepad in her pocket. He said the captain. Said there's a captain he needs to talk to before anything else. He was pretty insistent about it for a man who nearly died an hour ago. All three of them turned to look at Emily. She stood up slowly. "That's me," she said. The room was quiet and dim and full of the soft mechanical sounds of machines doing the work a broken body could not. And in the bed, smaller than Emily had ever imagined he could look, was Daniel Brooks. Titan. The great and terrible Titan, with tubes in his arm and a monitor tracking every beat of the heart that had tried to quit on him, and when he turned his head and saw her standing in the doorway, his eyes filled with tears. "You came," he said. His voice was a wreck, barely a whisper. "I didn't think you'd come." "I told you this morning I understood you," Emily said, stepping into the room. "I don't say things I don't mean, Sergeant." A sound came out of him that was half a laugh and half a sob. "Sergeant," he said, "you're going to keep calling me Sergeant. After all this, after I put my hands on you and you put me on the floor and my own heart tried to finish the job, you're still going to give me the rank." "You earned the rank," Emily said quietly. "Carrying that kid 4 miles earned you the rank. What you did this morning didn't take that away. It just complicated it. Those are different things. I told you this morning I was good at telling different things apart." Titan looked at her for a long moment. And then he said the thing he had asked her here to say, the thing that had been so urgent to him that he'd fought his way back to consciousness to say it. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need to say it before I lose my nerve or before my heart does something stupid again, because I've spent 40 years not saying the true things and I don't have time for that anymore. So just let me say it." "I'm listening." He gathered himself. It cost him visibly the effort of it. "When I was on the floor this morning," he said, "in the mess hall, those 4 seconds, when you put me down, you want to know what I felt? Tell me." "Relief," he whispered. Emily went still. "Relief," Titan said again. and now the tears were running freely down the sides of his face and into the pillow. For 1 second, lying there on that floor with the whole base watching before the shame kicked in, before the anger, before all of it, I felt this wave of relief because for 20 years I'd been waiting. Do you understand? I'd been waiting for somebody to finally stop me. Every room I walked into, every person I made smaller, some part of me was screaming, somebody please, please just stop me because I can't stop myself. I don't know how to put it down. And nobody ever did. For 20 years, nobody ever did. And then this morning, a woman with a cup of coffee finally did. And God help me, Captain, the first thing I felt was thank you. The machines beeped steadily in the silence. That's the most broken thing I've ever said out loud, Titan said. That I was grateful to the person who took my whole life apart. But it's the truest thing, too. You didn't beat me this morning. You freed me. And I couldn't tell you that in the mess hall because there were 1,000 people watching, and I still had that much pride left. But there's no pride left now. There's nothing left but the truth. And the truth is thank you. Thank you for finally stopping me. I've been asking somebody to do it for 20 years. Emily Carter, who had walked into a lion's den without fear, who had faced down a room of 1,000 hostile soldiers without raising her voice, who had not cried in front of another human being in longer than she could remember, sat down in the chair beside Daniel Brooks' bed and put her face in her hands and wept. Because she had heard those exact words before, not from him, from herself. 20 years old in the dark after the supply room, whispering into her own pillow, somebody please stop him, somebody please, and nobody had come. And she had made herself into the person who spent her whole life becoming that person, and she had never once in all the cases and all the confrontations and all the men she'd brought down, heard one of them say the thing that the 20-year-old girl inside her had needed to hear her entire life. Thank you for stopping me. I was asking to be stopped. You okay? Titan said, alarmed, trying to sit up. Captain, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. You didn't do anything wrong, Emily said, lifting her head, not bothering to hide the tears now, because there had been enough hiding for one lifetime. You did something right. For maybe the first time in a long time, you did something completely right, and it caught me off guard because I've been doing this for a long time, and nobody's ever said that to me before. She wiped her face. You're the first one, Daniel, in 3 years. You're the first one who understood that I wasn't the enemy. Everybody else fought me to the end. You're the first one who said thank you. And Titan Brooks, who had made a career out of being feared, looked at the woman crying at his bedside and understood finally the thing he had been too proud and too frightened to understand for 20 years. That the strong ones are not the ones everybody's afraid of. The strong ones are the ones who walk toward the thing everybody else runs from without a weapon and try to save it. You're not the enemy, he said softly. You were never the enemy. You were the only friend I had this morning. You were the only person on that whole base who cared enough to tell me the truth. Everybody else they got out of my way. They laughed at my jokes. They stood up when I walked in. And not one of them, not one ever cared enough about me to say, Dan, you're drowning, stop. You did, a total stranger. You cared more about my soul in one morning than people who'd known me 20 years. He reached out his hand, the one without the IV in it, and it hung there in the air between them, trembling. And Emily Carter took it. I'm going to make you a promise, she said, and I don't make promises I can't keep. There's going to be an investigation. You know that. There are going to be consequences, and some of them are going to be hard, and I can't make those go away, and I wouldn't if I could, because Nguyen deserves them, and the corpsman deserves them, and every person you hurt deserves to see it taken seriously. That part is real, and it's coming, and I won't lie to you about it. I know, Titan said. I don't want it to go away. For the first time, I want to face it, whatever it is. I know you do, Emily said, and that's why I'm going to make you this promise. When it's over, whatever's left, however it shakes out, whether you keep the uniform or you don't, I'm going to make sure you get the one thing this system almost never gives men like you. A chance to make it right, not to erase it, to make it right. To go find those young soldiers and look them in the eye and tell them what you told Kowalski in that hallway. To become a warning that walks and talks. Because a man who's lived it and owns it can reach a scared young sergeant in a way that 100 investigators like me never can. You could save people, Daniel. Real people. The road I told you about this morning, it doesn't just go somewhere better for you. It goes somewhere better for everybody who's about to make the same mistakes you made. Titan stared at her, and something came into his ruined face that had not been there in years. Not pride, something better than pride, purpose. You'd do that, he said. You'd stand up for me after. I'd stand up for who you're trying to become, Emily said. That's not the same as excusing who you were. And you need to hear that difference clearly, because you're going to want to collapse them together, especially on the hard days, and you can't. The man who hurt Nguyen has to answer for it fully, no shortcuts. And the man who's trying to make sure no other Nguyen ever gets hurt again, that man I'll walk beside for as long as it takes. Both things at the same time. That's the whole deal. Can you carry both? Titan was quiet for a long moment, and then he nodded slowly, and there were tears in his eyes again, but they were different tears now. I carried a kid 4 miles on a broken ankle, he said. I can carry both. And for the first time all day, Emily Carter smiled. A real one. Yeah, she said. I think you can too. There was a soft knock at the door. Kowalski stood in the doorway, and behind him, Colonel Reyes. They had heard, if not the words, then the shape of the thing that had happened in that room, and their faces showed it. Ski, Titan said, come here. Kowalski came to the bedside. And this huge, hard man who had defended Titan to the last, who had come at Emily Carter with everything he had stood over his fallen hero and did not know what to do with his hands. I heard what you told the captain, Titan said, in the hallway before I went down. Did she tell you what she wants me to do after? She told me the road was still there, Kowalski said, his voice thick. She told me to tell you it wasn't too late. She was right, Titan said. Ski, listen to me, because you're next if you're not careful. You know that, right? You've been walking my road for years, copying me, and my road ends here, in this bed, with my heart quitting and my career over, and a stranger being the only person who gave a damn about my soul. That's where your road ends too if you keep walking it. So don't. Whatever else you do, don't turn into me. Kowalski's face broke. Titan. I'm serious, Titan said. You want to honor me? That's how. Not by defending what I did, by being the thing I wasn't. Be the guy who puts the hardness down when he comes home. Be the guy who stands up for the scared kid instead of being the reason the kid's scared. You do that, and everything that happened to me today means something. You keep worshiping the man I was, and I died in this bed for nothing. Kowalski was crying openly now, this enormous man, and he reached out and gripped Titan's hand hard, and he said, okay, I hear you. I swear to God, I hear you. And Emily Carter, watching from the chair, understood that she had just seen the exact moment a chain broke. Titan had been passing his sickness down to Kowalski for years the way it had been passed down to him, the way it had been passed to the man in the supply room 20 years ago, generation after generation of frightened men, making other men frightened. And it had just stopped, in a hospital room, because one man finally turned around and said, don't be me. That was how it ended. Not with a fall in a mess hall. With this, Reyes stepped forward then. Brooks, he said, I need to say something to you, and I need Carter and Kowalski to hear it, so there's witnesses, so I can't take it back later when it's inconvenient. He took a breath. I failed you too, not just the people you hurt. You. Titan blinked. Sir. 20 years I watched you, Reyes said. I watched you go from that kid who carried the wounded 4 miles to whatever you became. And I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself operators are hard, that's the job, leave them alone. But I saw it, Dan. I saw you getting meaner every year. I saw the light go out, and I did nothing. Because it was easier, and because you were useful, and because confronting you would have cost me something. So I let you rot. For 20 years, I let a good man rot because fixing it was inconvenient. And Nguyen paid for my convenience. And the corpsman paid for it. And a dozen others paid for it, and so did you. His voice cracked. You paid for it too, son. You've been paying for it every single day. And I let you. The room was silent. I'm sorry, Reyes said. I'm the commanding officer. It was my job to stop you years ago before it got this bad back, when stopping you would have been a conversation instead of a court-martial. And I didn't, and I'll carry that, but I wanted you to hear me say it, because you deserve to know that this isn't all on you. You built the fire, but a lot of us handed you the wood, and we all watched it burn and did nothing because the heat felt good. And Daniel Brooks looked at the colonel he'd known for 20 years, the man he'd begged in the mess hall not to do this to him, and he understood something that took the last of the poison out of his heart. "You're stopping me now," he said quietly. "That's what matters. You're all stopping me now." "Better late than never's a lie," people tell themselves, Reyes said. "But it's still better than never. So yeah, we're stopping it now. All of us, starting today." There was a long quiet in the room. The four of them. The investigator and the fallen warrior and the true believer and the commander who had looked away too long. And in that quiet, something settled over all of them, some shared understanding that the morning had not just ended one man's career. It had broken something that had been running on that base and on 1,000 bases for a very long time. The silence, the looking at the floor, the comfortable lie that hardness and cruelty were the same thing and that fear and respect were the same thing and that the strongest person in the room was the one everybody was afraid of. Emily stood to go. She had a report to write and a case to see through, and she had learned long ago not to overstay these moments because the work of healing was not hers to do. It belonged to the people who lived here. But at the door, Titan called out to her one last time. "Captain." She turned. "That man," Titan said, "the one from 20 years ago. The one who did to you what I did to Nguyen." He paused and he asked the question with terrible gentleness, the question of a man who finally understood exactly what he was asking. "Did anybody ever say sorry to you in all these years? Did anybody who should have protected you ever come back and say, 'I'm sorry'?" I looked away. I should have stopped him. And Emily Carter stood in the doorway and she thought about it, really thought about it, 20 years of it, and then she answered honestly. "No," she said, "not once. Not the men in that supply room who heard and did nothing. Not the officers who buried the first complaint. Not one of them ever came back and said sorry. Not in 20 years. The room was very still. "I'm sorry," Titan said. Emily looked at him. "I know I'm not one of them," he said. "I know I can't apologize for what somebody else did to you, but somebody should have said it to you a long time ago, and nobody ever did, and I'm lying here with nothing left to lose and no pride to protect. So let me be the one, on behalf of every coward who looked at the floor while you needed someone to look up. On behalf of every man who should have stopped him and didn't. I'm sorry, you deserve somebody in that room. You deserve somebody to write it down. And it took 20 years and it's the wrong man saying it, but somebody finally owes it to you out loud. So I'm sorry, Captain. You were a kid and they let you down and I'm sorry." And for the second time that day in a quiet hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and machines, Captain Emily Carter, the strongest person on that entire base, put her hand over her mouth and wept because she had waited 20 years to hear those words. 20 years. And they had finally come from the unlikeliest possible person, from a man she had put on the floor that very morning, a man whose heart had stopped twice, a man who had every reason to hate her and had chosen instead to give her the one thing no one else ever had, an apology, on behalf of everyone who never gave her one. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea. 20 years, Daniel. Thank you." "No," Titan said softly. "Thank you. You walked into that room this morning to save some kid you'd never met, some future Nguyen you didn't even know yet. That's who you are. You spend your whole life walking into rooms for people who can't defend themselves. Because once nobody walked into a room for you, and you never get thanked, and you never get the apology, and you keep doing it anyway. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen. Stronger than anything I ever did overseas. I carried one kid 4 miles. You've been carrying strangers your whole life, and nobody ever carried you back." Emily could not speak. "So let me," Titan said, "just this once. Let the man you put on the floor this morning be the one who says it. I'll carry it for you. The thank you, the apology, all of it. I'll carry it 4 miles if I have to. It's the least I can do for the person who finally stopped me." And in that hospital room, the two of them, the fallen warrior and the investigator, the man who had hurt so many, and the woman who had spent her life protecting the hurt, looked at each other across a distance that had somehow impossibly in the space of a single morning, close to nothing at all. Two people who had begun the day as enemies and would end it as the only two people in the world who fully understood what the other had survived. Kowalski was crying. Reyes had turned away, his hand over his eyes. And outside the base went on and the story spread, and by nightfall there would not be a soul at Camp Pendleton who had not heard some version of what happened in the mess hall that morning. But the version that mattered, the true one, the one that would change things, was not the story of a woman who knocked out a Navy SEAL. It was the story of what happened after. In the hospital room, when two broken people chose grace instead of hatred, and in doing so, broke a chain that had been dragging good men down into the dark for longer than anyone could remember. Emily Carter wiped her eyes one last time. She straightened her uniform, and she looked at Daniel Brooks with something that was not pity, and was not triumph, and was not even forgiveness exactly, but was something deeper and rarer than all of those. It was recognition. One survivor looking at another. "Get some rest, Daniel," she said. "You've got a long road ahead of you, the hard one. And I meant what I said. Boom, you won't walk it alone." "Neither will you," Titan said. "Not anymore. However this ends, Captain, whatever they do to me, I'm on your side now, for the rest of my life. For every scared kid you walk into a room to save. If you ever need a broken old SEAL to stand behind you and tell the truth, you call me. I'll come. Wherever I am, I'll come." And Emily Carter smiled and nodded and walked out of that hospital room into the late afternoon light, carrying 20 years of unspoken words that a dying man had finally spoken back to her. And for the first time since she was 20 years old and alone in the dark, she did not feel like she was carrying them by herself. Behind her in the quiet room, the heart monitor beeped. Steady now. Strong. The heart that had spent 40 years being the wrong kind of strong was finally at long last learning how to be the right kind. The road turned out to be longer and harder than anyone had promised. 6 months passed, 6 months of investigations and hearings and paperwork of hard days and harder ones. Daniel Brooks recovered his health slowly, but he did not recover his career, and everyone had known he wouldn't, including him. The investigation confirmed what Emily Carter had spent 3 years uncovering. The complaints were real, the pattern was real, and when it was all laid out in a hearing room, black and white, page after page of the damage one frightened man had done, there was no version of it where Daniel Brooks kept the uniform. He didn't fight it. That was the thing that surprised everyone. The old Titan would have fought it with everything, would have called in favors, would have leaned on his reputation one last time. But the man in that hearing room was not the old Titan. When they asked him if he had anything to say in his defense, he stood up and he said, "No defense. Everything in that file is true. I did all of it, and I'm not going to sit here and make it smaller than it was, because the people I hurt don't get to make it smaller, so why should I?" And then he did something no one in that room had ever seen a man in his position do. He turned around to the back of the room where a young man sat quietly in a chair he'd been asked to attend, but told he didn't have to. Private First Class Tyler Nguyen, 20 years old, the kid whose 4-page letter had started it all. "Nguyen," Titan said. The young man went rigid. The young man went among. "I'm not allowed to talk to you privately," Titan said. "The lawyers made that real clear. So I'm going to say it here in front of everybody on the record where it counts. What I did to you was the worst thing I ever did in my life. Worse than anything overseas. Because overseas, the enemy was trying to hurt me. You never did anything to me. You were a good soldier who wanted to serve, and I broke that. Because I was weak and scared, and I took it out on the nearest person who couldn't fight back. And that was you." His voice did not waver. "I ended your career because I couldn't manage my own soul. And I will carry that for the rest of my life, and I should. You didn't deserve any of it. You deserved a leader. And you got me. And I'm sorry. Doesn't cover it, but it's what I've got. So I'm sorry, son, for all of it." The room was silent. And Tyler Nguyen, who had spent a year and a half believing that no one would ever believe him, that the great Titan would walk away clean and he would be forgotten, sat in the back of that hearing room and cried because the apology he had never expected to get had just been handed to him in front of the whole United States Navy. He did not say it was okay, because it wasn't, and Titan did not ask him to. But when the hearing ended and the crowd filed out, Tyler Nguyen walked up to the front, to the man who had destroyed his career, and he stuck out his hand. And Daniel Brooks looked at that hand like it was the most valuable thing he had ever been offered, and he took it, and the two of them shook, and neither of them said a word because there were no words left that mattered more than the handshake itself. Emily Carter watched the whole thing from the side of the room, and she thought, that's it. That's the whole thing right there. That's what I've been walking into rooms for my entire life. Daniel Brooks was discharged. Not dishonorably in the end, because the panel took into account his full record, and more than that, his complete ownership of everything he'd done. A general discharge. The uniform gone, but not the service erased. It was more than some thought he deserved and less than others hoped, which is usually how justice actually looks when it's real. Not clean, not satisfying, just true. And that should have been the end of it. A man loses his career, learns his lesson, disappears into civilian life, and the story closes. That's how these stories usually go. But this one didn't go like that. Because 3 months after the discharge, Emily Carter got a phone call. And it was Colonel Reyes, and his voice was strange. And he said, "Carter, you need to come back to Pendleton. There's something you need to see. And I want you to see it in person, because if I tell you over the phone, you won't believe me." She flew out the next week. She had no idea what to expect. And Reyes met her at the gate, and he drove her without explanation to one of the training facilities, and he parked and he said, "Just go in. Back row. Don't let him see you yet. Just watch." Emily walked in, and there at the front of a room full of young soldiers, sergeants, and junior officers stood Daniel Brooks, in civilian clothes, and he was speaking. "My name is Daniel Brooks," he was saying. "A lot of you know me, or you know the story. Some of you were in that mess hall. Some of you heard about it after. And I'm not going to pretend that story didn't happen, because that story is the whole reason I'm standing up here. So let's just say it out loud. I'm the guy who got knocked on his back in front of 1,000 people by a captain with a cup of coffee. That's me. That's the guy talking to you today." A ripple of nervous laughter went through the young soldiers. "You're laughing," Titan said. "That's fine. I laughed too. But here's what I need you to understand. The reason she put me on that floor wasn't that she was stronger than me. She wasn't. I was twice her size. The reason she put me on that floor is that I'd spent 20 years turning into exactly the kind of man the strong are supposed to protect people from. And she was the protection. She was what a real warrior looks like. And I was what happens when a warrior forgets the whole point of the job." The room was dead silent now. Nobody was laughing. And Emily Carter, standing in the back row where he couldn't see her, felt her throat close up. "Every one of you," Titan said, "is going to get hard. That's the job. You're going to see things and do things that make you hard, because hard is what survives out there. And I am here to tell you that the hardness is not the enemy. The hardness is sacred. It'll save your life, and it'll save the lives of the men next to you. But here's what nobody told me, and it's the most important thing I'll say today. So if you fall asleep for the rest of it, wake up for this part." He leaned forward. "The hardness is a tool, not a personality. You pick it up when the shooting starts, and you put it down when you come home. And the day you forget how to put it down, the day it stops being a tool and starts being who you are, that's the day you become dangerous to the exact people you swore to protect. That's the day you become me." He let that sit. "I couldn't put it down," Titan said. "I carried the battlefield home, and I pointed it at a 20-year-old kid named Tyler Nguyen, who never did anything to me but wear the same uniform. I ended his career because I couldn't manage my own fear. And I'm telling you his name on purpose every time I give this talk, because he deserves to be remembered when the story of my mistakes gets told. It's not the Titan story, it's the Nguyen story. He's the one who paid. Never forget that. When one of us goes wrong, it's always somebody smaller who pays for it." Emily Carter stood in the back and watched a miracle, because that is what it was. There is no other word for a man taking the worst thing he ever did and turning it into a shield for people he would never meet. "So here's my job now," Titan said. "This is what I do. I go around to bases and I stand in front of young soldiers and I tell them the truth about what happened to me so that it doesn't happen to them. I'm a warning that walks and talks. That's my rank now. That's my whole career. And you know what? It's the best work I've ever done. I saved lives overseas, and I'm proud of that, but I was a hard man doing a hard job. Anybody can be hard when they're scared. What I do now takes something I never had before. It takes being honest about being weak. It takes standing up here and telling a room full of strangers that I was a bully and a coward over and over, so that maybe one of you doesn't become one." He paused. "And I owe all of it," he said, "to one person. To the captain who cared enough about my soul to knock me on the floor when nobody else would. She didn't beat me that day. She saved me. She's the reason I'm standing here instead of lying in a grave with a heart that quit on a man who never learned to put the hardness down. She walked into a room full of people who worshiped me, and she was the only one brave enough to tell me the truth. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen a human being do, stronger than anything I did in 20 years of war." And then Daniel Brooks looked up, and he saw her in the back row, and he stopped talking. The whole room turned to see what he was looking at, and there stood Captain Emily Carter in her plain uniform with no flashy decorations, exactly as she had looked the morning she walked into the mess hall, and the young soldiers who knew the story understood at once who she was, and a murmur ran through the room. Titan was quiet for a long moment, and then in front of all of them, he did something. He came to attention, and he saluted her. "Captain Carter," he said, his voice thick. "I didn't know you were coming." "Neither did I until last week," Emily said. "Colonel Reyes told me there was something I needed to see. He was right." "You want to come up here," Titan said. "These young folks, they've heard my side. They should hear from the person who actually did the brave thing that day." Emily walked up to the front, and she stood beside Daniel Brooks, the man she had put on the floor, the man whose life she had ended and saved in the same 4 seconds. And she looked out at the room full of young faces, and she understood that this was the thing. This was what all of it had been for. "He's being too generous," she told the room. "He always is now. It's a little annoying, honestly." A few of them laughed. "He talks about the mess hall like I did something extraordinary. I didn't. I sat down with a cup of coffee and I refused to look at the floor. That's all. That's the whole thing. When he came at me, I didn't do anything 1,000 of you couldn't do. I just decided I wasn't going to pretend it wasn't happening." She looked at them, one by one, the way she always did. "Here's what I need you to understand," she said. "Men like the one Daniel used to be, they don't run on strength. They run on your silence. Every single day that a bully rules a room, it's because 100 good people decided it was easier to look at the floor than to look up. He wasn't powerful because he was strong. He was powerful because you all let him be. And the day one person stopped letting him, he fell in 4 seconds. 4 seconds. That's how fragile the whole thing was the entire time." She paused. "So don't tell yourself you need to be a special forces investigator to do what I did. You don't. You just need to be the person in the room who looks up. That's the whole job. That's the entire secret. Look up, say the true thing, write it down, stand up for the kid who can't stand up for themselves. And I promise you on everything I have, that is a braver and stronger thing than anything you'll ever do with a weapon in your hands." The room was silent, and then slowly someone in the back began to clap, and then another, and then the whole room was on its feet, and they were not clapping for the woman who beat a Navy SEAL. They were clapping for the 2 people at the front of the room who had shown them together what strength actually looked like. The one who fell and got back up is something better, and the one who never had to prove she was strong because she simply quietly was. Afterward, when the room had emptied, Emily and Daniel stood together at the front, and for a while neither of them said anything. "You did this," Emily finally said. "I want you to hear that, not me. You. I put you on a floor, that's easy. Anybody trained can put a man on a floor. What you did after standing up in front of strangers and turning your worst moment into their protection month after month, that's the hard thing. That's the thing almost nobody ever does. I've brought down a lot of men, Daniel. You're the only one who ever turned around and became this. Because you gave me the road," Titan said, "in that hospital room. You told me the same thing that made me carry that kid 4 miles was still in me. It just woke up. Nobody else would have said that to me. Everybody else had already written me off. You looked at the worst version of me on the worst day of my life, and you saw something still worth saving. Do you know how rare that is? Most people would have just been glad I fell. You were the only one who stayed." Emily was quiet. "Can I ask you something?" Titan said. "The man from 20 years ago, in Leavenworth, do you ever think about him?" "Every day," Emily said, "but not the way I used to. I used to think about him with this weight, this thing I carried. And now I think about him, and I think he taught me the most important lesson of my life without meaning to. He showed me exactly what I refused to become. Every room I walk into, every kid I stand up for, that's me answering him. That's me saying you didn't win. You made me into the opposite of you. You lose a little more every single time I look up instead of down." Titan nodded slowly. "He forgets you," he said, "but you don't forget him." "He forgets me," Emily agreed, "but I don't forget him. And as long as I don't, and as long as I keep turning it into rooms full of kids who will do it right, then he doesn't get to win. None of them do. Not him, not the old you, not any of the men who ever made somebody smaller because it made them feel bigger for a minute. They don't win because the ones they hurt refuse to become them. That's the whole war, Daniel. That's the only war that's ever mattered, and we're winning it. Slowly, one room at a time. Daniel Brooks looked at Captain Emily Carter, and there were tears in his eyes, the good kind now, the kind that had nothing to do with weakness. I'm glad it was you, he said, in that mess hall, of everybody who could have walked in that day. I'm glad it was you. You didn't just stop me, you gave me my life back, a better one than the one I had. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Captain, and you did it by knocking me flat on my back in front of 1,000 people. I'll spend the rest of my life grateful for the worst day of my life. And Emily Carter smiled. That, she said, is the most warrior thing I've ever heard you say. They walked out of the training facility together into the afternoon light, the investigator and the fallen warrior who had become something better than he had ever been. And behind them in the room where they had stood, a group of young soldiers were still talking quietly about what they had heard. And one of them, a young private, barely 19, said to the sergeant beside her, I'm never going to look at the floor my whole career. I'm going to be the one who looks up. And the sergeant nodded and said, yeah, me too. And that was how it spread. Not because a woman knocked out a Navy SEAL, but because two people who started a day as enemies chose in the end to save each other, and in doing so taught 1,000 young soldiers the only lesson that has ever mattered. Anyone can carry a weapon. Anyone can wear a uniform. Anyone can earn a title and demand fear and rule a room through the silence of good people who are too afraid to look up. But true strength was never the thing everyone was afraid of. True strength was the quiet woman with the cup of coffee who walked into the lion's den without a weapon because somewhere a scared kid was staring at the floor and she had made a promise a long time ago that she would be the one to look up. And she kept that promise. Every room, every time, for the rest of her life. A uniform can show what you have achieved, but your actions in the moment when no one can make you do the right thing reveal exactly who you truly are. And Captain Emily Carter, who never once had to prove how strong she was the strongest person any of them ever knew.